Good afternoon, everyone, and I'd like to welcome you and call to order our Middlesex County Council meeting for Tuesday, January the 17th. We acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape peoples, who have long-standing relations to the land, water, and region of southwestern Ontario. The local First Nation communities of this area include Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames First Nation, and Munsee Delaware Nation. This building is on land within the area of Treaties 21 and 29 and the London Township Treaty 6. We value the significant contributions both in the past and the present of local and regional First Nations of Turtle Island. We acknowledge the historic and ongoing injustices that Indigenous peoples endure in Canada, and we affirm our commitment to honoring Indigenous voices, nations, and cultures, and to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect. So some of us around this table have had the privilege of meeting Jack Baker. Jack was a warden of the county in 1972, and on January 9th, at the incredible age of 95, Jack passed away. As his obituary reads, Jack believed strongly in public service. He was a counselor and then the reeve of the former Delaware Township. And during his municipal service and even out of office, Jack found time to serve his community by sitting on the library board, the Kettle Creek Conservation Authority, and the Western Fair Association. Middlesex certainly was well represented by Jack. To learn a little bit more about this former warden and this incredibly kind man, I'd like to ask Bill to share a few words.
Oh, I'm happy to, Warden. Jack and I first got to know each other whenever I moved here 25 years ago. And some people often say, what does a past warden do? I don't think there's a great job description anywhere, but for what a past warden does, but there should be a picture of Jack in the dictionary for past warden because he was so supportive of everything that we did here, Warden, so supportive of the staff. I know our team just lit up every time we got a chance to meet Jack, and he would meet us with that big smile and say, what can we do for you, Bill? What do you need? And that was just the way Jack lived his life. He was an incredible businessman. We were kind of brought together talking about Holsteins because my dad had some Holsteins when I was a kid, and Jack had a lot of Holsteins whenever he was a kid. And just an incredible business career. But I only knew him through the time whenever he was really done with his public service, but he never really stopped giving back to the people in this room and to Middlesex County. We've lost some titans of leadership in this county, the people that the foundation of everything we do here, Warden, sort of the compass for that guides us through the future. We've lost Al Edmondson, Albert Bannister, Bill Grieve, some real leaders that have provided us with not only examples to follow, but a pathway to the success that we enjoy today. So I know Brian and I were talking yesterday just about how we relished the opportunity to sit with Jack at 95 years. And the conversation wasn't about Jack. It was about what's going on in the county. What can he do? What more can he do to support us? And just so thankful for the time that we've all had with Jack. And I know Brian and I really are proud that we have that opportunity. And also thank you to Janice, who is his daughter, who Jack, I think, probably had a perfect attendance record at all of the opportunities to come to the inaugural and to past wardens events. And Jack was there thanks to Janice and to the team of support that Jack had right till the end. And we appreciate her for everything that she's done, and we'll certainly miss his smile and his guidance around this table.
Thank you very much, Bill. And I know that on behalf of our colleagues and staff, condolences have been sent to Jack's family, and a donation has been made to the charity of his choice. So I would also like to take this opportunity, though, to congratulate Jocelyn Amos, who is the captain of the under-18 women's hockey team that just won gold at the IIHF Women's Under-18 Hockey Tournament. This win marks back-to-back championships for this incredibly talented team. Jocelyn is a proud resident of Middlesex County. She's a student at Medway. She lives at Elsa Craig, and she's a Lucan Minor hockey alumni. So Brian and I both like to share ownership of Jocelyn. But the team itself is made up of incredibly local talent from our area. 5 of the girls on that team play for the London Devilettes team. So this area was certainly represented well. Jocelyn unfortunately sustained an injury in the first game that kept her out of play until the semifinals, but her leadership off the ice was evident as the team went through the tournament undefeated. It is quite an accomplishment to play at this level and to captain a team. Jocelyn really does have incredible talent, and both Brian and I are confident that we will continue to see her flourish, not only with her Devilettes team, but on the international stage, continuing to represent Canada. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Okay, seeing none. Is there any business arising from the minutes that have been presented to you? Then we'll move right into the minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes in front of us from December 8th, 2022, the inaugural meeting, and from December 13th, which was our regular meeting. If nothing has to be amended or changed, I would ask for a mover and a seconder to accept those minutes and the recommendations made by the Committee of the Whole as to be adopted. Councillor Smybert and Councillor McGuire. And all in favor, and that's carried. So we don't have any deputations. And are there any notices of motion or inquiries? No reports, so we will move right into new business. And the first report up is from our CAO, and that is a report on the Management Consulting Services Agreement with Oneida of the Thames.
Thank you, Warden. The document that we're submitting is something that this council may not have seen before. It's a follow-on agreement, 2 follow-on agreements ago with Oneida First Nations in an effort to provide them with management services for land ambulance. It may not be terribly evident to everybody yet in your career as a counselor, but Oneida is a separate and apart ambulance service. Even though we provide service around the whole region, they're separate and apart, and they had a need for management service for land ambulance, and we gladly filled in that role. We kind of thought that this arrangement would be over at this point in time, but it isn't, and they've asked us to extend the agreement with them to continue to provide the management. As the report says, there is no financial implications to the county. It's a complete cost recovery for us, and it is part of what we should be doing to support our neighbors, especially in land ambulance and other services. So we're happy to recommend this, and we'll come back to council. We're working actively with the team out at Oneida to make sure that they have the resources they need going forward. We're hoping that in short order, they'll be in a position where this type of agreement won't be necessary for them anymore.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Any questions of Bill on this report? Councillor Rock.
Thank you. Through the warden to Bill. Bill, it's just from January 17th to March. Is that right?
Sorry, correct.
And so would it have to come back to council, and if it has to be extended out?
We will come back to council. The definition of whether it has to or not, I probably have the authority to authorize some of these things myself, but we will bring it back to council just because I want to keep you updated. There is in any of these agreements where we're delivering a service outside of our jurisdiction, there is a risk component. So I really feel much better after I tell you about the risk and make sure you understand that we're providing the service. It's minimal, obviously, but it's more reputational, I think, if we don't help and provide this service at this point.
Any other discussion? Okay, then you do have a recommended motion in front of you that a bylaw be introduced at the January 17th, 2023 meeting to authorize and approve the management consulting services agreement between Oneida Nation of the Thames, the Corporation of the County of Middlesex, care of the Middlesex London Emergency Medical Services Authority operating and Middlesex London Paramedic Services effective January 1st, 2023, and authorize the warden and the county clerk to execute the agreement. If I can get a mover and a seconder for that, Councillor DeVite and Councillor Mayhew. All in favor? And that is carried. On to councillor comments. Do we have any councillor comments? Councillor Clark.
I think I'm gonna die here. Thank you, Warden. I just received an email this morning. From Prabmeet Singh Sarkaria, hopefully I pronounced that right, who is actually the president of the Treasury Board and the minister responsible for emergency management. And it's a certificate of appreciation to the Township of Adelaide Metcalfe. And for those that don't know, 32 days into this term, we had to declare a state of emergency. We had a 52 car and a combination thereof of transport trucks and whatnot. Just at the Kerwood Road 402 interchange, the transports were flipped over, zero visibility. There was about an inch thick of black ice. The Kerwood Adelaide Metcalfe fire crew responded. And I have to give a shout out and a big thank you to two of our neighbors, Warwick, but more importantly, Strathroy Caradoc. Through the mutual aid program, they showed up. Their guys had extraction gear and that was used. But what people don't realize is both Adelaide Metcalfe and Strathroy, the rescue trucks couldn't get through because the carnage was so bad and the conditions were so bad that these guys and gals, they carried this equipment over 800 meters to get to the accident scene to help the people. And Strathroy Caradoc and Adelaide Metcalfe organized buses to transport people to the Gemini Center for we called it a warming center. We had an Adelaide Metcalfe OPP officer that was off duty that stepped up to show up to help at the Gemini. Mayor Grantham came along as well. And I can't say enough, Darren, I don't know his last name. He's an employee at the Gemini. He fired up the coffee machine, made sure there was bottled water there. And it's just a perfect example of what we can do when we work together. And so that certificate of appreciation, I think I have to share that with Strathroy Caradoc to a greater extent and to a lesser extent to Warwick, because they came, we had multiple accidents all at the same time. We didn't even have enough rescue people. And also a shout out to the EMS. They were instrumental as well. So there was quite a few players involved, and the good results couldn't have been what they were without the participation of everybody. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
May I comment, Warden?
Yes, absolutely, Councillor Grantham.
Thanks for the kind words, Mayor Clark, Councillor Clark. Excuse me, just one other comment. As CAO Rayburn knows, the city of Buffalo is known as the city of good neighbors. I like to think that here in County of Middlesex, we're also known as good neighbors. So thank you for the kind words.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other councillor comments? I just have one to share, and it's just some information to share some information. I've submitted my name to be considered for the board of directors for Ontario Good Roads Association. It would fall under my role as a county councillor, but it's not coming to council for approval or through bylaw because there's no cost to the county for this position. There are some associations where the cost is borne by the municipality, but with Good Roads, the board expenses and all of that is paid by the association. So we'll see what happens. So just let you know. With that, I don't think if there's any more councillor comments, we'll move on to bylaws. Marcy.
So we have bylaw number 7207, a bylaw to amend the committee appointments for 2022 to 2026. Number 7208, a bylaw to adopt the rules of procedure. Number 7209, a bylaw to authorize a management consulting services agreement with Oneida Nation. And number 7210, a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of County Council on January 17th, 2023.
And then I would ask for a mover and a seconder to give those bylaws their first and second reading. Councillor Clark and Councillor Smybert. All in favor? That's carried. And then to give those bylaws the third and final reading. Councillor McGuire and Councillor DeVitt. All in favor? And that's carried. If I could just get a mover and a seconder so that we can move into the committee of the whole at 1:16 p.m. Mover and second. Councillor Ropp and Councillor Brennan. All in favor? That's carried. We can be considered to be in the committee of the whole. So the first report and delegation we've got in front of us is presentation on the Attainable Housing Review. And it's as they make their way down to the seats. I have great pleasure in welcoming Cassandra Vink from Vink Consulting and Tim Welch from TWC Consulting. This project's been going on for a number of months now, so it's great to have you here in person and welcome you, and I'll turn it over to you at this time.
Thanks very much, Warden. It's a pleasure to be here in person as well. As some of you will know, over the past several months, we've been working on an attainable housing review, and we came to the last council in the summer to introduce the initiative. Today we're here to present some of our preliminary directions. The aim of the Attainable Housing Review is to better understand the current supply and demand of housing across the continuum. It's intended to identify gaps in the provision of housing and prepare a municipal strategy aimed at addressing the broad array of housing options that are available to meet the continuum of needs across the county, both of current and future residents. The Attainable Housing Review includes a number of components. We looked at existing strategies and other documents. We did an analysis of housing data, a review of roles and responsibilities in housing, looked at best practices in comparison to other municipalities. We had a number of community engagements, including focus groups with stakeholders, some questionnaires of the community members, some community roundtables, 2 online surveys, some interviews with people with lived experience of homelessness, and a public workshop. We also, as part of the review, we're completing a public-facing information on housing issues and options and how to access information on housing. We're also preparing the development of preparing a affordable housing developer information guide and preparing some land use planning recommendations. From our engagement process, we heard a lot about a few key pressing issues in the county, in particular, lack of affordable housing options. Other key messages that we heard include lack of options for seniors and for young families, and the need to create a greater diversity in the supply of housing, both in the type, in the size, and in the tenure, and the need for more supportive housing in the county. From our data analysis, it was clear that there's a decreasing housing affordability within the county. There's limited housing availability and options versus some of the demand pressures you're experiencing. There's limited affordable rental housing and ownership development that meets affordability definitions. And we're also seeing increases in visible homelessness and use of temporary accommodation. Unfortunately, Middlesex isn't alone in what it's experiencing in terms of decreasing housing affordability and increasing homelessness. There are also challenges that exist in the county in developing affordable and rental housing, in particular in rural areas due to the lack of economies of scale. Investing in all areas of the housing continuum does support the creation of a healthy housing system. If any options are limited, it can place pressures on other parts of the system. For example, if supportive housing isn't available, it can create more pressure on shelters and people living on the streets, as well as pressures on the health system. Both nonprofit and private developers and landlords have a role to play in meeting housing needs in the community, including developing and operating both affordable rental and affordable ownership housing. And I'll just turn it over to Tim to walk us through a few of our findings related to roles and recommendations in that area.
Okay, thanks very much, Cassandra. When looking at, and when we prepared this slide, we were trying to think how to pare it down to make it more digestible. And it really does reflect the complexity of creating and maintaining affordable and attainable housing. It's not straightforward, unfortunately, is the reality, whether you're a nonprofit, a private developer, members of council and staff of council, that there are 4 levels of government, or really 5 levels of government that are involved to a certain extent. You've got at the federal level, the last 6-7 years, we've seen a national housing strategy rolled out, positive initiatives in terms of capital funding. The provincial government has had a role ongoing. It changed somewhat 20 years ago when it downloaded responsibilities to the municipal level. It had a major role, of course, for the City of London as the service manager for both the city and Middlesex County. And that's been an ongoing source of probably, I'll say, confusion at times in terms of what that role of the City of London is as service manager, as opposed to the role of the City of London with some of its own housing initiatives focused just on the city. And then at the municipal level, the county has had certainly an active role in terms of some of the support systems and delivering in terms of homelessness support. And there's also roles in terms of planning approvals, having in terms of having a range of physical types of housing that can be available that can help with the attainability and affordable housing needs. But again, when you look at all these different factors, you can understand when people say, well, where do I go? Where do I start in terms of trying to create affordable or attainable housing? So it is a great challenge that way. Next slide, please. As I mentioned that there are significant capital funding or financing programs through CMHC, through the federal government that do help in terms of meeting those needs. And what we found in some of the feedback is that there was not a clear understanding that proponents, whether private sector or nonprofit, could apply directly to CMHC. They don't go through the City of London as service manager, whereas other programs, you do go through the City of London as service manager again. So it is a great challenge that way. And we've got direction from the province of a number of programs and initiatives, and the funding for the operation of the existing not-for-profit housing, the London and Middlesex County owned housing, as well as some of the private nonprofits, goes through the city. And as I mentioned, the City of London has had some funding that's federal, provincial, directed from the province to the city as service manager, that London has supported a number of projects in the city and have in the past supported some projects in the county as well through that federal provincial funding. But as I mentioned, there is other funds the city has raised through its own direct city tax levy that it has put into its own housing initiatives as well that aren't available to proponents in the county. So trying to keep track of all that again can be very challenging. So again, that we had a lot of feedback of the challenge of trying to work your way through these issues. So when we look at the needs and gaps, trying to have clarity in terms of what is the role of the county, what are the roles of the area municipalities within the county, trying to fill some of the gaps. Again, there's some active good work done by the county in terms of trying to meet the needs, but as Cassandra mentioned, there are some additional emerging needs for people who are homeless or need support services. There's that lack of clarity in terms of the funding allocations, how much is for the city, how much for the county, how much is shared. And then there's the challenge for a county and area municipalities don't have a huge amount of funding to go into supporting different housing initiatives. So what can be some selective roles of whether it's financial assistance or not collecting fees or property taxes, the local that could support attainable and affordable housing. Land, of course, is a really key asset in creating new affordable and attainable housing. So there are a lot of groups, there's good community groups, there are municipal parcels that come up for availability. So trying to get a full understanding of what land could be brought to the table in support of attainable and affordable housing. And then also the issue of community engagement and building support. I would observe in a number of municipalities in the last few years, there's been an even stronger level of community support, recognizing the need both socially, but also from an economic development perspective to have that range of affordable and attainable housing. But even with that higher level of support in communities, there still can be certainly resistance towards specific proposals that come up in people's neighbors in their neighborhood. We did touch in the report or have a fair bit in the report in terms of looking at some of the best practices that are out there to support new affordable and attainable housing. We tried to look at examples from other non-service manager municipalities, as well as looking at other municipalities that are at the county level. Again, I won't go through all the examples we have here. In neighboring Huron County, there was the goal where the county put some dedicated money from its own municipal tax base to support a new development. There's probably been some media coverage of a 40-unit development in Goderich, but that was through a distinct decision of the county to put some municipal tax dollars in towards that project. In the city of Guelph, a larger community, but city of Guelph is not the service manager. The county of Wellington is the service manager, but Guelph felt because of the housing needs there, they would contribute some money that would be administered by the county of Wellington to support new affordable housing developments in the city of Guelph, so in the non-service manager area. Another example, again, in a community in Woolwich, I live in Waterloo region. So again, it's not the service manager. They were able to work with a community organization, put forward a piece of land at no cost to create affordable housing. They just recently run an RFP. So again, that's a contribution through the non-service manager through an area municipality within a regional structure. So there are a number of good examples of different communities have tried to be more and more creative to look for ways to help meet a variety of housing needs. Just looking at some of the immediate or shorter term recommendations that are emerging in our report, that to try to work to clearly define what the strategic role of the county has been or will be moving forward. What are there activities it wants to undertake that it'll have a primary role, or other activities it could do jointly either with the service manager, City of London, or with the area municipalities, to try to have from this report to develop a roadmap for action for different to implement the plan, for developing a master plan in terms of land. And again, land is really key because you can't create housing without land to go on that. And as our experience certainly over a number of years, different federal announcements or provincial announcements will look for land that is ready to go or already zoned appropriately for housing developments. So we found for a number of municipalities are trying to pre-zone sites once sites are identified so that they can be ready to leverage and access federal and provincial dollars when those monies are available. And to create an integrated team to try to coordinate that between both area municipalities and the county, but also the county consider, does it have a designated staff person, whether it's a part-time staff person or a shared responsibility to help with that coordination. And then finally, we've also got in the short term in terms of an engagement plan, whether it's reaching out to community organizations that might have land, reaching out to the neighborhood public generally in terms of the importance of creating a range of affordable and attainable housing. Finally, for the medium and longer term is to start to work with organizations within the community to start to build that capacity, whether it's working with private sector developers to have some of their sites have some affordable or attainable housing, to look at, is there a structure, if sites are identified, will they be owned or administered by a community organization, a land trust, by municipalities? So to work through what's the best structure to work on having land prepared for future affordable and attainable housing, to have further discussions with the service manager, with the City of London about potential for specific requests or expressions of interest for housing that will be in Middlesex County. And again, in the longer term, continuing communication in terms of engaging the community, sometimes dealing with neighborhood opposition. So a strategy for that is important in the long run. Sorry, Cassandra, perfect timing as my throat dries up.
Thanks, Tim. The next part that I'd like to talk a little bit about is a review of existing local planning policies and some of the findings there and recommendations that came out of that review. So we looked at the county's official plan as well as the official plans and zoning bylaws of local municipalities. And we identified that there are opportunities to strengthen policies to communicate your objectives related to affordable and attainable housing and creating a diversity of housing supply. There are also some opportunities to modernize policies. That includes policies related to special needs housing, group homes, as well as additional unit policies or sort of your secondary suite, secondary apartment policies to make them more permissive and align with provincial policy. There's also some opportunities to streamline development processes. And to do that, we think there's opportunities to expand permitted uses in some cases, including having more multi-use zones, some more as-of-right zoning for a greater variety of housing types, ensuring that zoning bylaws are up to date with official plans, and prioritizing approvals for affordable housing. In terms of some of the financial strategies that could be could provide opportunities for the county and local municipalities, we think the county and local municipalities could consider incentives and funding for both affordable housing as well as purpose-built rental in general, including things like waiving and reducing planning and building fees, property tax forgiveness, or grants and loans through community improvement plans. The county and local municipalities could also consider a number of planning policies to encourage affordable and attainable housing in a range of different housing types and forms. We think there's opportunities to define affordable and attainable housing within the policies, to adopt some housing targets, to establish policies related to maintaining an adequate land supply, and policies to support universal accessibility of housing. Policies could be implemented that provide modified standards for affordable housing or zoning that supports compact development, as well as manufactured housing and shipping container housing. You could also include policies to encourage new detached units to be suite ready like in the basement, or have lock-off suites in condos to be able to split them into multiple units. You could consider implementing rental retention and replacement policies, and to be in keeping with the requirements outlined by the Ontario Human Rights Commission. There are opportunities to remove references to special needs housing and group homes and minimum distance policies within zoning bylaws. One of the things that came up in our initial meeting with council was a desire to really define what affordable and attainable housing is. So we've proposed a definition here for you. In terms of rental housing, we're suggesting for both, we're suggesting building on or using the province's definition in the provincial policy statement. And it has two potential thresholds, and the lower one, whichever one's lower, applies. So in the case of affordable housing, it is a unit where rents are affordable to low and moderate income households, where low and moderate income households are households earning in the bottom 60% of household incomes. Or if it's lower, a unit that is rented at the average market rent. So in your community, that's rents of about $1,039 last year. And that would be the lower threshold in this case. For ownership housing, the definition is either would be the lower of housing that is affordable to low and moderate income households, all low and moderate income households, so earning in the bottom 60% of households. So those households can afford a price of about $572,000. Whereas the other option, if it were lower, would be 10% below the average purchase price of a resale home. But because of the strong housing prices in Middlesex County, that is higher than the definition based on income. So the income threshold would apply that $572,000. We're also suggesting that some targets be identified for the county, that could be built out over a 5-year period. We're suggesting that the county aspire to 10% of all new units be affordable rental housing, so have rents less than about $1,040 a month. That 15% of all new housing be affordable and attainable ownership housing, so priced less than $572,000, and that 10% of all new units be purpose-built rental units, and that 25% of new units be in the form of multiple units or apartment dwellings. In some cases, you will need senior levels of government support to see these targets come to fruition, but they do set out objectives for what aligning with what is needed in the community in terms of affordable housing and just maintaining your existing proportion of rental housing. And and that is all.
And that's it. And you ended your presentation with a lovely shot of a great community, great community's Main Street. So thank you very much for that presentation. Certainly, it's obviously a very topical topic and lots of great information for us to digest. Questions or comments, conversation from my colleagues around the horseshoe on what's been presented? Councillor Ropp.
Thank you through the warden. Thank you very much for the presentation. I had a couple of questions ready for this before the presentation came out. But one of them is, I have a couple of questions, if I may. One of them is, how can we work better with the city to help ensure that our residents the needs are being met in housing and in homelessness? And the other one, if I may, we do have a piece of property. If we do have a piece of property, it's in the main downtown area, the best process to get started to actually have something happen. When you've heard from the Housing Corp that it's not in their plans at this time, how then can we proceed to make this happen? Because we are all seeing homelessness within our rural communities now. We're all seeing that. So those are the two questions. The last comment I would make is the numbers for affordable housing and rent at $1,039 a month is considered affordable, blows me away, plus $572,000 or less is considered affordable housing. I don't see how that's affordable, but that's just a comment to that. But those were my two questions. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Warden. Thanks for that question. In terms of working better with the city, we think there's a number of suggestions there. One is making sure that you have the data on your housing needs and have a clear understanding of what some of your objectives are so that you can engage in those communications with the county. We think there is a need for ongoing communication with the county in regards to implementing an action plan that you outlined. You do have councillors that sit on the London Middlesex Housing Corporation, and we think there's opportunity through there for staff to provide to engage councillors more, to give them more information on questions to ask, things to consider as part of decisions that come up through the Middlesex London Housing Corporation as well. So I think one of the pieces as well is just making sure you're clear on the roles of the county versus the roles of the service manager, and having some discussions where there are, you know, obligations that they need to meet, having discussions on how that is going to be met, as well as where things are optional for different stakeholders to take on that role. For example, supporting housing to get to the point of being able to apply for funding from the federal government. It could involve having staff having conversations with city staff to discuss what role they would take on versus what role county staff would take on, and whether there's opportunities for one to take the lead on certain aspects and work together to implement some of those pieces that are beyond the scope of the service manager role.
And maybe I could just add a couple of things on that, the discussions with the city to try and make sure there is clarity each year about the funding that comes through the province under I'll call the federal provincial program. Every few years, the acronym changes. Right now it's a COCHI, OFI are the very catchy acronyms that they use. So to make sure, and again, county staff have the regular discussions, make sure that's clear in terms of what can be available. With your second question, Councillor Rock, on a piece of property, and we work with a lot of different nonprofits and some private sectors. Certainly, yeah, land is the starting point. Identifying and working with your municipal planning staff, what's a reasonable size development, and then identify who can be the potential proponent. A municipal nonprofits, there's many of those that exist, or you could run, as I mentioned, the example in Woolwich Township or Elmira, having the municipality run a proposal call to see what other groups in the community might be interested in develop, or maybe there's a private developer who wants to do affordable, attainable housing. So an expression of interest is certainly one way to build some interest in that. There are some, and starting to reach out to some of the federal programs, the CMHC programs. There's historically been a seed program that can help provide some initial funding to do, making sure there's no environmental issues, making sure the soil can support a 3-story building, for example, if it's going on there, and also do initial architectural sketches. So looking to apply for small pots of money to start to develop that concept, and then look for opportunities, whether it's a future proposal call by the city as service manager that includes the County of Middlesex as well as the city, or for some of the direct CMHC programs, like there's a program called the co-investment that provides below market interest rates and some small grants. So there's a number of things to search, but it is identifying who's the proponent, roughly what size is the development, and then who is your target? Are you going to have a mixture of incomes? So you have some more attainable and maybe some units that are more deeply affordable.
Any follow-up, Brian? Are you good? Okay. Any other questions or comments? Councillor McMillan and then Councillor DeVete.
I do have one question. Under affordable and attainable ownership housing, the least expensive of item number B, how do you arrive at that 10% below them? And sort of what's the benefit or incentive for a builder developer to move in that direction?
Through you, Madam Warden, the 10% below the average purchase price is the threshold that the province has set in their definition. So it's just looking at a little bit below what would be available on average in the market. And then in terms of incentivizing developers to go to that those lower amounts, there are a few things that could be considered. One is, in some cases, could be establishing planning policies that support more affordable development, whether that be smaller sizes of units, more multiple units, that sort of thing, as well as potentially having incentives for reaching various affordable housing thresholds, whether that's waivers of fees or property taxes or grants or loans. Another opportunity is when developers come in with their development applications is starting those conversations on how many of these units do they intend to be affordable? Have they thought about making them affordable? What is needed from their perspective? What external support is needed to be able to get it into an affordable range? Things like that.
Yeah, just on that, again, having things clearly set out in official plans at area municipalities, for example, that you have an affordable and attainable housing goal, again, very much can open the door to conversations when developers are coming forward, having it on forms when you have an initial pre-consultation with planning staff to say right there, how are you going to meet our municipality's goal of 15 or 20% affordable? As an example, a few years back, we were doing work in Cobourg in Northumberland County, and it was really, I'll say, creative engagement by planning staff saying, okay, you're going to do a fair size subdivision. What piece can be affordable ownership? And they went back and forth with a dialogue, and the developer came up with sort of quads. They were 900 square foot, 4 units constructed together, and they were significantly below the price. They were marketed to seniors of modest income, and they sold quite well. The developer was a little bit surprised. So they needed some more in the development, in the subdivision. He also did lots of traditional single family homes as well. So it's trying to have your policies to proponents, to developers. How are you going to help us meet the policies? Because we need that range of affordability in the community, and then start the dialogue and discussion.
Councillor DeBeat.
Thank you, Warden, through you to the presenters. Appreciate the report. Thank you. There's a lot there to digest. My question relates to the same slide. When we talk about gross annual income for low to moderate income homes, is that based on the census information for that municipality, or is that based on county? So does it vary? So if it's affordable in one municipality, but given the difference in, you see where I'm going. So how does that work there?
Great question. We do like to recommend at a minimum, it is the countywide affordability levels. So the province does require all municipalities to have policies to support affordable housing based on the definitions, which are based on the regional area. We do generally like to, people, just because they move on from one side of a local municipal line to another doesn't mean they can necessarily afford more. So we do like to use that. That doesn't necessarily, though, preclude local municipalities from having a lower threshold if they do want to go even deeper based on their local area, if it does have lower income levels in that community.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor McGuire. And then Councillor Graham, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Warden. My question is off of slide 16. It's a question that was asked of me some time ago, and I'm just wondering if you can provide clarity on this one specific issue. It says modified standards for affordable housing zoning to support compact development, manufactured housing, which I understand, and shipping container housing. It was always my understanding that shipping containers were not occupiable within the province under the building code. Do you know anything about this, or has that changed?
If I may, through you, Warden, that certainly there are communities where shipping container housing has been built and is certified under the building code. Usually it takes a little bit of effort, first time through for local building inspectors to make sure they're comfortable with that. I live in Cambridge, Ontario, and we had our first 8-unit shipping container conversion built. And people moved in, and again, there was had to be some initial outreach with building inspectors. So it is pretty, I mean, it's not just a shipping container, it's fully converted with a private bathroom, and all the plumbing, wiring, and fire safety standards apply to those units as well.
Okay, Councillor Grantham. You just need to unmute Colin.
Geez, we'll get that clicked down there. Thank you, Warden. I appreciate that. Really pleased to see the report. I purposely asked to be the county representative on London Middlesex housing, as this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. So over the course of my time, I will be advocating more for the county to see more what we can do. And I do believe we need to do more on rent geared income and attainable housing, because as Councillor Robb noted, and I concur, when you see the cost of affordable housing, I have a belief that the markets will take care of affordable housing, but it really won't take care of attainable housing. So just more of a comment that this is something that I will advocate for, the London Middlesex housing. Thank you, Warden.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Smybert.
Thank you. I agree with Councillor David in terms of the findings within the study. I think there are a lot of great tools in here for not only county council, but the lower tier councils as well. My question though was about next steps, I guess implementation. So I'm not so sure who that question should be addressed to, but if this report is adopted or accepted by county council, what does staff envision the next steps to include, and what will come back?
Well, who wants to take that? Do you want to start, Bill, or Cindy, do you want to speak to it, or?
I can take a shot at the first part. Can I talk about what we were just talking about? Okay. I didn't know if I was stealing your thunder. Do you want to? As you know, my style is educate, then ask a question. So I think we need to use the information here to present to in my view, the housing issue is really one that is squarely in the hands of the city, even in the county, legislatively. So we need to do a lot of education with them about the findings of this report and some of the things that we want to see, and lay out specific targets that we'd like to see. The warden and I were talking about opportunities to do that. Certainly, Colin mentioned one, presenting this information to that authority. And then also we have a management oversight committee for social housing that was set up a long time ago. We meet twice a year, I want to say, about that. And we were just talking, the warden and I were just talking about, we could probably in short order also present this information to them. And then work on those targets that we're talking about. And Cindy, if you want to pick up from that point, because a lot of what I'm going to be doing is the communication with the city about what we find. I think more the implementation of, it's very difficult to implement when you're not in control legislatively, as we're all acknowledging. But setting targets for the city to try and implement would be a good starting point. Cindy, you want to pick up from that?
Sure, through the warden. Thanks, Bill. I guess I just echo some of Bill's comments. I think we really need to take this information back, not only the presentation, but there's also a report that's coming. So there'll be the team, there's myself, there's Dirk, there's Kara and Joe, that will be kind of looking through the whole report, deciding about how do we go for next steps, coming back to council with kind of a plan. But you are right, we have quarterly meetings with the city for the MOC, and the next one comes up in February. I've already sent them a link for this presentation, so they can already see that. So we have great dialogues and conversations with the City of London. We'll also be asking that team for the housing to come to council. That'll be sometime in the new year, so they can remind you again about what their roles and responsibility is, what are some of the current issues that are going on out in the county and the City of London. As you know, as part of budget discussion, I'll be talking about the amount that we get billed from the City of London to the county. So that'll be in lots of discussions in part of the budget. So it's just a lot of really thinking through what the suggestions, what the recommendations are. How do we go about talking to council and also local municipalities? Because we also have to engage not only county council, but also 8 of the local municipalities to talk about how does that relationship work? And as you've seen in the presentation, there's a role for the county, but there's also a role for the local municipalities. And we have to work together as a team in order to address and meet some of these targets. So there's a lot of work ahead of us. So we're excited about coming back to council and talking about next steps.
Is that okay, Councillor Smybert? Just, I guess, what is your timeline for that? When are you thinking you'll be back after you've been able to review all this?
Through the warden to council, I expect that will probably be March, April. I want to kind of get through the budget, which comes in March. So we'll be having lots of conversations again about some of this during the budget process. But for an actual report, I'm thinking probably in April is a good time.
Okay. I am just kind of before I ask if there's any more comments, like, I'm glad that you've shared the link with your colleagues over at the city, but I do think that there would be a lot to be gained actually to have this team present directly to the city. Then it can't be ignored. It's one thing to hand the report and they can just politely say thank you very much, but to have this team present directly. So I mean, I think if we could work towards that, I know that there's an MOC in February, so that's likely too much, and especially with budget. So maybe we could work towards the next one, but I wouldn't want that piece to be lost. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay, with that, thank you very much. It is a lot of information. And as Cindy said, certainly, not only for us, but our local municipalities. And we certainly look forward to hearing those next steps and working with everybody at every level to try and have some positive outcomes with that. With that, I would ask for a mover and a seconder that the Attainable Housing Review presentation be received for information, please. Councillor Ropp and Councillor Smybert. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you again. Next up, I'm pleased to welcome in person Mark Brown, our Woodlands Conservation Officer, who is going to be speaking to us about moth monitoring, LLD moth monitoring. So welcome, Mark. It's always great to have you at County Council.
Thank you very much, Warden. Happy New Year to all the councillors, those that I've met and those that I haven't met. Sorry if I can't see your name tag, I probably won't be able to remember. Not very good with names. So yeah, I'll keep it brief. I'm sure you remember, if we dial our memories back to 2019, 2020, we were getting a large volume of calls from residents concerned about the what was then referred to as the gypsy moth, then the LDD moth, and then renamed once again spongy moth. So we were getting a lot of calls, and the outbreak was almost at its peak. Quite a lot of defoliation in the county woodlots and in private woodlots across the county. So there's a lot of concern. I reported to council during 2019, 2020, and 2021, I think. In 2022, we decided to take the initiative and set up a monitoring citizen science program. We bought a bunch of 250 traps and the lures for the spongy moth, and we recruited citizens and interested other parties and professionals, colleagues in the industry across the county. We put out a call for volunteers through our media relations office, and we got a lot of calls, a lot of response to that. So we signed a whole bunch of people up, and they were able to go to the municipalities and pick up a trap and the information package and set up their trap in their backyard. And CFIA, who were our partners, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, we've partnered with them over the years. We try to keep a really good, close relationship with them because we want to be at the cutting edge and know about any early detections of invasive species that might impact our forest. So we want to keep right on the cusp of that. So so the initiative involved basically putting together trap kits, distributing those to interested volunteers. We did that through the municipal offices and our awesome library, Middlesex County Library System. People were able to pick them up at municipal and libraries, and a few were mailed out as well and hand delivered by yours truly. And they set them up in June, and we monitored them in July. With the benefit of hindsight, we should have refreshed them in August, but we didn't. So when we did the final trap collection and count in September, most of the traps were overfull, should we say? And it was quite difficult to count all of the specimens. But anyway, we kind of worked through that, and we've learned from it. And samples of the moth trap collections were sent to CFIA labs for testing, and the lab CFIA staff and the labs are trying to detect if we have any unknown species getting caught in the traps. Excuse me. So the main objectives was to boost collaboration with our citizens, get them involved, education, outreach, all those good things. And I think our results from that far exceeded my expectations. People were just really anxious to take part and learn, and you know, including the 8-year-old boy who emails me a whole bunch of questions. And before he set up the trap, you know, so we answered those questions, and the community was involved. So that exceeded my expectations. We did some mapping through our GIS department. I think we could probably scroll through that. We don't want to see Mark Brown stuffing envelopes, or Mark Brown setting up traps, or Mark Brown collecting moth samples. We don't need to see that, but that was the back of my truck. I was kind of a roving moth collector. I don't know what you'd call me. Anyway, so yeah, fun days. So we did some mapping, and we kind of noted what our hotspots were in the county where we were collecting more than, or counting more than 100 moths midterm. And then fast forward to the end of the season. The next slide, please. Final moth counts. So we can identify from this where the hotspots are still in the county. And the highlights from that, I would say those are mostly areas where the forests are in their most intact ecosystem, balanced ecosystem kind of parameters. So where the forests are fragmented and the population of predators and natural controls is less less frequent, then those are the kind of forests where the spongy moth has been able to keep its numbers up and not drop as we anticipated. But lessons learned, I think I already reflected on a couple. It appears that around the city, they might be able to produce 2 life cycles. We're not too sure. So we're going to try and continue the research in terms of that. It may be that the urban heat island effect is allowing them to hatch earlier, mature earlier, and then produce a second life cycle. But we're not quite sure about that. So we're going to work with CFIA this year and see if we can figure out if that's actually happening or if it's something else, because we weren't sure the trap numbers, the collection numbers were kind of throwing us off in and around the perimeter of the City of London. Certainly the citizen science, we've got a great pool of volunteers now. We have their email addresses, their phone numbers. We're in touch with them. We're going to share the final report with them. They're still engaged. So we can mobilize them again if we want to, or if we need to, for future years in terms of citizen science. And it doesn't just have to be about forest pests, but that's my focus. I'm a bit of a timber nerd. So yeah, that's and working with the CFIA is great. They're obviously, protecting our borders, across the whole of the nation. And working with the local staff was hugely rewarding. They're involved, we're involved, great partners to work with. And yeah, kudos to everybody that took part, all those people that spent their weekends counting moths on their porch or wherever they did it, or just phoning me and talking to me on their doorstep when I collected traps. Kudos to them for taking part, and I think it was a very worthwhile project, and I can't emphasize enough the value added of that public involvement, community involvement. That you can't really put a number on it, I don't think. Like, you can't we can dial it down to dollars and cents, what it cost in terms of my time and, the buying the traps and all that kind of stuff. But I think in terms of the community involvement, we can't really put a value on that. And that's something that I think reaches into the future. So thank you, Warden.
Great. Well, thank you, Mark. And yeah, I would echo what you said. I think the benefits from this, far exceeded what it was supposed to do. So questions or comments from council on what's been reported? Councillor McMillan.
Thank you, Warden. I just wondered, I lived through this experience. We have a cottage up near Prairie Sound, and we're right in oak tree country. It was the most hideous thing I've ever. Do you monitor the egg masses that are left, or what do you do with them? Because I spend a lot of time scraping trees to get rid of them. Thanks.
Yes, through the Warden. Yes, we do a winter egg mass count in the county forests, and we encourage citizens to do that on their property as well. And then egg mass scraping is probably the most valuable preventative measure that anyone can take on their own trees and on their own property. On a public scale, it's really just not feasible. But yeah, we looked at that in the county forest, and we've done a winter egg count, and the egg masses, or viable egg masses, have been dropping very consistently over the last couple of winters. And obviously the province do their egg mass counts as well across the province of Ontario, and they report that out in their annual forest health review, which I can provide a link to. It's another bunch of bug nerds talking about forests and trees and bugs and the dynamics of the insects, et cetera, et cetera. We get very excited about this stuff, but I'm sure it's pretty tedious for non-foresters.
Any other comments or questions for Mark while we've got him here? Okay, with that, I would ask for a mover and a seconder that the LLD moth monitoring presentation be received for information. Councillor Clark and Councillor McMillan. All in favor? And that's carried. Thanks very much, Mark. Great to see you. Okay, on to the Municipal Modernization Program for IT Strategic Plan. And I will turn it over to Chris Bailey, our Director of IT Services.
Thank you, Warden. Through you to Council, as part of Intake 3 of the Municipal Modernization Program, County IT submitted a third-party review stream application for an IT service delivery review and strategic plan. The motivation for this project was to provide a comprehensive assessment of current ITS within Middlesex County and develop a 5-year strategic plan. The strategic plan will help staff make informed decisions, ensure consistency in decision-making, provide a long-term step-by-step guide for future improvements, and deliver a formal process for documentation as well as prioritization of ITS projects. In addition, the plan will achieve cost savings and efficiencies through strategic decision-making that will help manage current and future technology services. There will also be a big focus on investments in shared municipal business systems to deliver value and reduce costs. Blackline Consulting was a successful respondent of the RFP for this project as presented to County Council in 2022. County ITS worked with Blackline over the last 6 months to review IT services and develop the plan. The comprehensive plan has several recommendations. I'm going to actually turn it over to John Nas from Blackline Consulting, and he's going to go through a summary of the plan today and answer any questions that you might have.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Just going to share my screen. There we go. Sorry, one moment. I'm just pulling up the presentation.
John, we can share it on this end if you want.
Oh, I've got it. There we go. All right, today I'll take you through a bit of the context, which I think Chris has already spoken to. We'll talk a little bit about the current situation, why change in the first place. Talk a little bit about the upcoming priorities, or what we're suggesting in terms of what the priorities should be for the IT department, the roadmap, and then what you'll get from it. Just in terms of context, the review follows 4 phases. It's by design driven to be non-technical. So we do start with meeting with the various departments, as well as the lower tiers, basically the customers that consume the technology services. So that kind of kicks things off. We then meet with IT, and then we do an assessment of the technology, the IT department, and so on. And effectively kind of leads you through this journey from discovery through to insight and reporting and creating your final strategic plan. We did it collaboratively through the IT department as well. Just to give you a quick summary, because I do think it's important sometimes to recognize the effort and labor behind, the everything that you use from a technology perspective on a day-to-day basis. The IT department at the county's 14 individuals, and they're responsible for quite a bit. They've got about almost 1,000 different customers across 10 organizations, quite a large landmass and number of locations that they need to support when you think about all the networking equipment and so on that's required to keep that up and running. They've also got quite a number of tickets that they need to support on a day-to-day basis in terms of the work volume. They've been able to maintain a high available environment, and they've also been able to move forward with quite a few number of projects year over year. On the right-hand side, we've got a framework that assesses all the major buckets of IT when you think about the services that they provide, everything from how well they align in helping the municipality and lower tiers with their strategic planning and kind of enabling it, the systems that you use, the infrastructure, the assets, and then everything kind of below it. As you can see here, nothing that requires immediate attention. And we've also had the pleasure of working with Middlesex Center last year to help them with their IT master plan. So it's quite helpful to kind of look at both and as a bit of comparison. But as you can see here, no major concerns. There's a lot of blue, which are partially meets or needs some attention. And effectively what you'll see in terms of the roadmap are recommendations to enhance that and to evolve that. And again, it is about suitability. So it's not necessarily, we're not comparing you to large municipalities. We're saying what's most suitable for the county and its customers. We've identified 10 initiatives. Technology, I can't imagine anything else, but is going to continue to be a key enabler. I know it's been that way since the pandemic, but and obviously it's kind of recognized with the modernization funding. But there's about 10 initiatives that we've suggested as in the next 5 years for the municipality to undertake. I'm going to step through each one of them. So I'm just going to pause right now and I'll go through them in each one by one. Revised IT service agreements. One of the things that we looked at is the relationship between county IT and the lower tiers. And today you do have service agreements in place. We did a comparison to some of the common practices around what should be included in service agreements, service levels, service expectations, and so on. And what we're suggesting here is that while it works today, there's an opportunity to enhance it and evolve it, particularly around some of the service descriptions. Some of the things that the county does today actually isn't necessarily captured well in the contract today. So that needs improving, and we've actually got an IT service catalog that we've worked with the county to create. Service levels, again, we looked at the service levels and everything from response time to for when something breaks, projects, availability of services. So all those are kind of common service levels. We've looked at them and suggested some refinements. So that's one, which is refining that. The second is the pricing model and making sure that the pricing model is keeping up with costs in the current market. And I'm sure everyone can attest to the impact of inflation. It's not just inflation when it comes to the hardware. Part of it is also supply chain related. So that's where there's been some increase in pricing and labor, of course. So what we're suggesting is a new pricing model that kind of lays out a pricing strategy for the next, not just 5 years, but beyond as well, so that we're able to make sure that it's fair, it's equitable, and that it captures some of the risks relating to costs. Finally, updating those contracts and then drafting the new agreements and getting those in place. And I do believe that this is something that's planned for this upcoming year. So making sure that all this happens. What's the benefit? Why do these? Clarity around expectations. And I do think that having worked with many organizations, both in the public and private sector, whether it's shared services or outsourcing agreements, managing expectations is really critical to the relationship. The second one is just making sure that the pricing is equitable and it's universal kind of across all the customers that ITS has. The second, which speaks to, I think, what we've been seeing, but I think there's an element of working with the lower tiers closer to come up with modernization plans. So not just a one-time event, but on an ongoing basis. So assessing the customer needs, what do they need on an annual basis? How is that changing? Whether it's systems, data, technology, identifying solutions of economies of scale. And by that, there are going to be some instances where more than one of the lower tiers is going to market for either particular software or hardware or a modernization plan. Where can we work together, whether it's even resourcing from a procurement perspective, or if it's actually buying the same product itself. Then drafting those modernization plans and then keeping them up to date on an annual basis. So, effectively having a multi-year roadmap for each of the lower tiers, so that one, ITS has a good understanding of what's needed, but then also making sure that we're taking advantage of good cost savings and economies of scale. Grid and application architecture. So today, the architecture, if you think about even a house, you've got a blueprint about what that looks like and some of the plumbing and so on, especially if you need to make changes and enhancements to it. A similar idea where today some of the architecture diagrams aren't necessarily there. Be helpful and beneficial to identify some modernization opportunities for automation. It also will help to remove any of the manual activities. So if you can imagine over 5-10 years, I imagine most of the organizations are looking for cost savings or efficiencies. Technology is going to be one of those levers that you'll be able to pull. You really need to make sure you've got a good understanding of the systems, the applications, what data they have, how they might speak to each other, and then what that means in terms of greater efficiency for staff. Develop technology literacy programs. I've seen it a few times in my career where we get the best system based on the requirements for the organization, but we fail on the side of making sure that staff have what they need in terms of knowledge and expertise. So what we're suggesting is creating a literacy program, and it can be everything from Microsoft products, how to use Excel, how to use Word, as well as much more kind of specialized data analytics and so on. Each organization, each kind of customer and each department that ITS provides services to, it varies, and that's to be understood. There's a different labor force and different age and demographics that we need to understand. So what we're suggesting is working with different HR departments and HR organizations to build a kind of a needs assessment. What do the staff need to perform their job today? What's the gap? Maybe where are there some capability gaps? And I'm sure the departments will have some views on that and where that might be. develop a literacy program. And the literacy program shouldn't just look at existing staff. It should also look at jobs for the future. What do we need? How do we make sure that we're hiring the right candidates? Or at least we could recognize that maybe it's the right candidate, but they don't necessarily have the literacy that they require to do their job, and then give them that support as they kind of go on their journey. The benefit is productivity and also making sure that we're getting the most out of our investments in technology. Number 5, revise ITS documentation standards. Very simple. This one's a bit more straightforward. There's some documentation that ITS has and they maintain around network and infrastructure. What we're suggesting is for them to revise it, slightly enhance it. It's about separating some of the diagrams and information, so it's a bit more site specific. It'll make it easier for them to protect some of the information when they do need to share it, as well as keeping it more easily usable when they do have third parties that they're working with. Number 6, building and executing a technology migration plan. Effectively, what we're suggesting here is right now, many of the lower tiers, they have infrastructure, servers, and so on, and storage at local facilities, the town halls, maybe operations center. What we're suggesting is that it doesn't necessarily, it's not what has never been built for high availability, those areas. What we're suggesting is moving those to the county data center where they have that resiliency, they have redundancy, whether it's power, backups, network. So, it's a kind of multi-tiered resiliency at the county. So what we're suggesting is to move the equipment from the lower tiers into the central data center. Still doesn't, you're still able to have your own kind of closet or area, but it does give you all the benefits of the resiliency that you have within the data center at the county. It also can provide some cost savings, especially around backup and recovery. Lastly, because then the hardware wouldn't necessarily be at the lower tiers, it will reduce response times or improve response times, I should say. So ITS won't necessarily have to travel out to locations to fix something that may require a physical location. Number 7, enhance ITS governance. There's a governance that occurs today and it's been evolving over the past couple of years. What we're suggesting is formalizing it a little bit more, providing a bit more structure around when we meet, how often we should meet, what are we going to be discussing, what material are we going to be reviewing, so that IT can put together a dashboard for each of the lower tiers and say, here's how we're doing on various aspects that should relate back to the service agreement, the services that they're providing, as well as any additional projects that they're performing. It should reduce unexpected costs, but also it should help that relationship around making sure that ITS is more responsive to customer needs. Last page on the initiatives. Number 8, revise service continuity practices. We looked at everything from the business continuity plans, disaster recovery. One of the things that we looked at is to make sure that the information is up to date and accurate. Secondly, that it's easy to use. And in the event of a disaster or an event, you really don't want to be searching around for information or having a 200-page document that you're looking through to find information. You want it simple, fast, complete checklist. So what we're suggesting here is to do some refinement around some of those documentation, do a full business continuity test, and then regularly reviews and revise those documents, because things do change. And in some cases, you're going to find some lessons learned that can enhance things. The benefit, ITS will be much more efficient in handling disruptions and potentially reduce downtime. Enhance ITS's service delivery. As we looked at ITS and the service tickets the incidents that they respond to, the service requests as well around new staff or new equipment. What was evident is that needs to be a bit more monitoring around the workload and the relationship between that workload and staffing, making sure that we've got a good understanding around when that might change. So making sure that we've got a good understanding there. Partly because you may have a growing backlog, and then that will kind of have a ripple effect in terms of response time. So that's the first one. The second is addressing any kind of capability gaps. And the one that for me that we identified is around project management. You've got a project coordinator today. However, given the volume of projects, and unless there is a substantial change in the adoption of technology, that's likely to continue. So there is a bit of making sure that we've got a way to address that kind of project management capacity and capability gap. Lastly, is also to make sure that we work out a succession plan. IT is a very difficult space, especially during the pandemic, of retention and attraction. So again, something to put a bit of focus on. Lastly, service desk practices. What we're suggesting here is to look at some of the IT processes, making sure that they're streamlined, implementing some self-service capabilities. It may not, push a lot of volume to self-service, but usually there's some percentage of individuals that will use that. It also then allows more of that 24-hour kind of coverage for that self-service capabilities rather than requiring an individual, and then monitoring the progress on how that is achieved. In some cases, it's going to improve the resolution time, provide a bit more resiliency in the sense of, if I can offer this as a self-service, you're not reliant on individuals to do it, and therefore, if they're busy, then you can do it yourself, and also improve communications around service expectations. So in terms of timeline, we've laid out and we've worked with ITS to make sure it's a reasonable amount. As you can see, and with many of these, I find that they tend to be front loaded in kind of 3 years. I've been working in IT for about 20 some odd years. Years and years ago, we used to be able to do 5 years and predict 5 years fairly well. It's now becoming more difficult. And I think 3 years, I've got a great degree of kind of confidence in what we've laid out here. Beyond that, then, that's probably when we probably need to look at things again. But as you can see here, there's some have dependencies on each other, but overall, the 10, it's most likely going to be occurring in the next 3 years. We haven't assumed budgeting for this. We expect that as part of this moving forward, it would follow your normal budgeting process, where ITS would come forward with the capital requests and get approval as part of your normal process for that. Lastly, what do we get? How are we better off? Well, the first, I think, big one is improved resiliency, making sure that, there's quite a bit of reliance on technology today, whether it's in the field or in the office. So improving that resiliency, making sure that it's available. Improved effectiveness, making sure that ITS as a service provider is effective on how they're delivering services. Security, that goes without saying, making sure that we kind of continue to make sure that there's a focus on security and keeping data protected and our staff. Cost avoidance and savings, there are two initiatives that we believe that will lead to either cost savings or cost avoidance in the future. Some of the opportunities relate to productivity improvement by your staff. And lastly, improved ITS response time. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your time today.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Chris, did you have anything to add on to that?
Thank you, Warden. Not really. I just wanted to thank John and Blackline and John's entire team. They did an excellent job. It was a busy 6 months reviewing things. Definitely a lot to work on over the next 5 years, but I was happy that there wasn't any major gaps or issues found. So kind of in the medium zone in a lot of areas, and really looking forward to the next 3 to 5 years working on the things that were suggested and improving the service.
Thanks. Questions or comments for either John or Chris from the council? Councillor Robb.
Thank you, Warden. Just a comment, really. This looks like a huge undertaking for IT over the next 4 or 5 years.
That's for sure. Anything else? Councillor Smybert.
Yes, I agree. This looks like it's going to be a great tool for staff, and I like how they're not satisfied with the status quo. They want to increase their efficiency and effectiveness. My question deals with the development of the modernization plans. I've noticed that it's going to be over a 4-year span. And as part of the first part, it's understanding what the needs are or assessing the needs. Is there any risk of those needs changing by the time that you're actually implementing the plan?
Through your worship, I can answer that. What we've outlined there, and you're absolutely right. You can see there's a bit of a cadence, and each year, what we're suggesting is that the first year is kind of set a multi-year plan, and then each year it's updated because things do change. But I think some of the key aspects that we're looking at is the systems and the technology that you use. The needs may change, But in terms of how you meet those needs, will probably remain the same. And if I use the kind of a finance system, some of the municipalities are potentially going to look at maybe replacing a finance system. That's a need, and it's maybe not going away. I think what's more likely to happen is prioritization and how heavy of a priority some of those things are year over year.
Okay, any other comments or questions for either John or Chris? I guess the only question I have, and I think this is more for Chris, is the note underneath the timeline about assuming the approval of the initiatives and funding will be part of the budget and the lower tier. Has a lower tier, or are local municipalities been part of this? Are they aware that there could be, costs that are going to be bore on them to implement this as well?
Thank you, Warden. They are aware there's service agreements are actually coming up for renewal this year. So one of the recommendations, I think it was number one on the list, is to review those service agreements. I have had discussions with all the CAOs about there could be some changing costs. The idea is to work with legal services to adjust and modify the agreement and bring it back to the CAOs, present that for another 5-year term. So they know things that are coming, but also, as John mentioned, a lot of this is about cost avoidance, bringing things into the data center to save money, consolidating systems, bringing everyone together. And just to answer Councillor Smibert's question a little bit as well, is I think, formalizing some of the governance in terms of, more meetings, more regular meetings with CAOs, as well as senior managers at the local level, will allow us to kind of bring together and figure out those systems that we can blend into that modernization strategy moving forward. Unfortunately, the provincial modernization program is over, but it doesn't mean we need to stop modernizing. So I'm pretty excited, as I said, for the next few years. And I think there's a lot of opportunity here. So
that's great, Chris. Okay, one last call for questions or comments. Councillor DeVete.
Thank you. This has to do with the cycling of things through the chart. Some of those green things are going to have to happen again. I assume that as the world changes, we have a box here. That means we're going to do it for sure by then. That doesn't mean it stops in my mind. Am I making an incorrect assumption? For example, you talk about, I don't know. Documentation standards. To the extent we have a standard, but to the extent that certain things change or new kinds of things drop in, there may have to be changes too. So some of this is an ongoing process precipitated by another one of those boxes happening. I was assuming that, but I just want to make sure I'm not dreaming.
No, through the Warden to Councillor DeVete, absolutely. This is kind of just a guideline for the next 5 years. I would assume these boxes will just continue on for, likely past my time here, of course. I think a lot of these are stepping stones to get things started, that they'll continue to evolve and they're never really going to end. Especially as with IT, things change so quickly. So really none of this is ever going to have an end point in 2027, but it is a good starting point for us to kind of formalize our plan moving forward.
Through the word, just to add to that, I think the way that we look at it is there's a change event. There's an effort of time that, it's almost like a concentrated project if you're a mini project. So that's what we're trying to illustrate on the plan. Once it's been done, then, typically what happens, it moves to what we call business as usual. So you're absolutely right in your point, which is, we're not just going to do it when it's over, but it moves into almost a different category of work, if you will. And I'm sure there'll be other things that will be added then as that change agenda.
Yep. Thank you for that. Any other comments? Okay, with that, you do have a motion in front of you to receive the strategic plan for information, and further that the Director of Information Technology Services be directed to ensure any costs related to the recommendations are contained in the draft 2023 and future budget submissions for consideration and support. A mover and a seconder, please. Councillor DeVete and Councillor Smibert. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much for joining us, John, and thanks, Chris. Moving on. Bill, you're back up. Local archives update.
Thank you, Warden. I have the the next two presentations really fall under the same category. In a lot of time in January and February and March of a new council, it's my job to make you aware of decisions that were made by the past council that are going to carry over into your term and how they might impact upon you. So this first one is about the local archives. And I just want to walk through some history and provide some information, educate a little bit about the council question that was asked, and then also do some education in regard to where we are in the process of what council asked us to do. Also, to give you a little bit of an update, we'll move forward the slides quite a bit there. We'll also give you a bit of an update in terms of why council made some of the decisions that they've made in the past around this. Now, it all started with a third-party request. And that third-party request was longstanding. I think I first started hearing about it, a request for archives, like a couple of years after I started here, which was, a long time ago. And so it's been out there. And it's come up infrequently, usually about once every 2 terms it would come up and then catch some fire and then go away again and then come back up again. So it's come up a number of times, and council over the years has really looked at this issue a lot. The last time I remember before the last council got to the point of making a decision around capital, which was pretty significant discussion that took a couple of months to get through. So there have been quite a few debates about this, and it's an interesting debate. I think in the My Thoughts section, I think I haven't hidden the fact that I'm not a big supporter of this project. I'm not a big supporter, not because I don't think it's a great idea. Whenever I took this job, someone said to me, "Bill, you're in an interesting seat." It was the former CAO here. And I said, "Why do you say that?" And he said, "Because people are going to come to you with 10 great ideas a week that will better the community, and you won't be able to afford any of them. And every once in a while we can afford one, but in my time here, we really haven't gone too far outside the box of what our legislative services are that are required to be delivered. But we get a lot of great ideas. Like we've heard, if you think about even today, there's probably been 15 great ideas just on housing alone of things that are outside the legislative box for us, and things that if you had a magic wand, you'd do. Certainly in my view, the archives project is a great idea. It's just not one that I support because there's so many things that we're legislatively responsible for that I would put ahead of it. But I did provide a copy of my previous report where I talked to council about this, and so that you have it. A lot of my thinking on this really comes from the spheres of influence. You'll hear me say legislative responsibility a lot. In the Municipal Act, there's what we call the spheres of influence. There's things we have to do. We have to send an ambulance when someone calls. We have to provide a nursing home is another thing we have to do. There's things we have to do legislatively that are very, very specific. There's liabilities if you don't, personal and professional. This is not one of those. This is not one of those things that falls within the legislative basket where you have to do it. And that is a large part of my thinking on this. Often I used to hear that we need this for counties for records management. We don't need this for records management in Middlesex County for Middlesex County. I don't know the situation every local municipality, of course. There may be a municipality that isn't following it's a legislative responsibility. So when someone says you need this for records management, that's a real aggressive claim, because there's a legislative requirement for all clerks in all local municipalities to handle the records within the legislation. I can guarantee you 1,000% that happens here. There's no requirement for this from a records management perspective. I commented last time we talked to council about this is that we have a shared history challenge. You don't even have to go past my birth date to know that Middlesex County and London you don't even have to go back from the time in my professional career, just the annexation alone. We have a shared history with London. And I never thought it made sense to do an archive that was Middlesex County without having a partner in the city of London of any kind, electronic or any other kind, just because there's simply too much shared history. And the city has not expressed a willingness to look at archives over the course of my time here in any way that would be meaningful to create one. The other question I asked council back then was which Middlesex. If you go back in the history of time, there's been so many different iterations of what Middlesex County is. It's very hard for me to tell you, I can tell you what Middlesex County is today. I can tell you what it was in 86. I can tell you what it was in 64. Almost every 25 years, Middlesex County's boundaries have changed over the course of history. And if you don't believe me, you just look at Wikipedia. You go back to the early 1800s. Most of what Middlesex County was in that early days when we started is in Brant and Elgin County now. And it's shifted like all the way over to Norfolk. So it's really hard to have an archive whenever the ground of what you're trying to do as an archive is shifting. There is no one definition. And as well, that's part of why I've encouraged as much as possible, and we've supported financially, the development of local history, because the history that is, say, Newbury or Southwest Middlesex history is quite a bit different than Lucan history, because there was a time when Lucan wasn't even in the county. In part, it was headed, more to the north and to the east, and Southwest was headed to the south and to the west with their history. And so local history has become, you'll hear people say, well, you don't have an archive, everybody else has an archive. But we do have a really strong local history component, in my view, in this county that isn't always in place in other counties. So another thing that you'll hear that council heard was about care and control of records. I personally wouldn't allow any the thought on this was that there would be some value to having a place where records could be stored off-site. There's no way legislatively Marcy or I would allow anyone to touch our records besides a municipal employee or allow them to be stored off-site. That would be, professional misconduct. So it's not something we would even consider, that idea. And we talked to council about that last time as well. So I think the reason these are brought up is these are efficiencies and savings. They're just not legislatively allowed to be done. And even if they were allowed to be done, Marcy and I would probably fight tooth and nail to make sure that they weren't taken out of our care and control, because we have a legislative responsibility for them. I mentioned earlier, and this will become painfully evident in your first budget session, there's a lot of great ideas. There's a lot of great ideas even in where we're legislatively required to provide them. We just did our ambulance budget yesterday, and Mike and Brian and everyone that was at that meeting can attest, we had way more great ideas than we had money to provide them. And it's really tough when you sit in this chair and you get a look at the entire budget envelope to say, okay, let's go spend something on something new, money on something new, instead of spending it on areas where we know we're underfunded. I would rather put another nurse in place at the nursing home, or another ambulance in place, or I can think of a myriad of things where we're legislatively responsible and we have risk, where I'd rather spend that money. And it becomes more obvious, I think, Warden, whenever we get to budget session, and you're going to be tested. You're going to be tested with a lot of things that we do have legislative responsibility for. And it's going to be difficult to go outside that box, I think. It is for me to recommend it. That's why. We heard a little bit last time about economic development benefits of an archive. I think those are very overstated. I didn't find any evidence of that for Middlesex County in my review that I could even point to. We heard a lot about a capital facility being requested. So that means having a building where there's archives. Council fell far short of thinking about that. We don't have capital space at all really available. We can talk more about this building in the next presentation, but we just don't have that capital ready. You'd have to build something purpose-built for this. And even if we did have the space, you can't have an archive without it being purpose-built, or you're wasting your time. These are specific facilities that have to be built a certain way. Finally, I talked about this dangerous I talked about several reviews that council's done over the course of time, and each time decided not to move forward with an archive. And with all of that being said, it doesn't always happen whenever I say, I don't think we should do this. Council didn't say that we should do this. What they said is, we'd like to learn more about what it would cost to do this. And this is their very specific direction. The next slide, sorry, guys, I'm ahead of you, but the next slide is, to give further consideration to potential options and discuss including a feasibility study in the 2022 budget discussions. At the budget committee, they did give me $15,000, of which I don't think Bailey, we didn't even use a cent of that, did we, Marcy? No, we didn't use one penny of that 15,000. We got together as a group and did the feasibility study without going and hiring someone. To look at the next section that council asked us to look at, which was really about a digitized archive from non-municipal records. We were also asked to explore municipal modernization funding and to come back and present something to council. So this is really the first step, is telling you, here's what happened. We've gone through that now. Here's what I said I thought should happen. Here's what council decided to happen. Now the next step is to tell you sort of what the review looked like. And when you look at the results of my initial review, it is achievable. It, like I always tell everybody here, we'll make happen whatever council asks us to make happen. And it's not even that expensive. Like I remember Colin asked me this week, Bill, what's the realm of what this might cost? You know, between $100,000 and $120,000 in the first 18 months. And I can, in the budget meeting, we can go into what that would look like with some ongoing costs of 70 or so thousand. We're not talking about we're not talking about millions of dollars here, without question. What we did learn is that there are several software options, and we've narrowed it down to 2 software options that are the most efficient and effective. When I say efficient, I mean integrate with our system, easy to use, could be used in a hybrid model where there's some volunteer provision of service and some professional provision of service. And I think all of that could be achieved electronically while preserving the documents that are of local history significance, local historical significance. This is a doable project. This is a doable project without going past $200,000 or something, some number like that. It's also possible to reallocate internal resources. We took a look at what we had internally before we thought about going, you know, because the normal course of action would be to put on an RFP and have consultants on. We actually have the in-house expertise to do the policies and to put the program in place. So people with the expertise that have done this before, because the big thing about putting together an archive is really, if you're going to allow the non-municipal records to come in, which ones are of value? How do they get into the system? How do they get categorized? How do they get stored? What kind of retention policies to use, et cetera, et cetera. Access. There's a million policies that have to be in place. We feel that we have the internal resources. It won't be without cost because we'd have to pull some of that time away from other projects, but we do feel we have that internal expertise where you wouldn't have to go out and spend money on consultants or anybody else to pull this off. So again, I wasn't sure when we talked about this last time, Warden, just how easy or hard this would be. I think we've come to the conclusion it's not necessarily pressing the easy button, but it's not really that difficult for, as long as we stay in the digitization electronic realm. It could be done relatively easily. I say that because I'm not going to have to do the heavy lifting, but that's Bailey and Marcy. Well, Marcy, maybe not, but maybe Bailey. So we think that a hybrid model could work as well. We've talked a lot about that utilizes human resources. You have a very willing and interested group of archivists or people interested in the archive community. You're blessed with that. So you might as well take advantage of it. You might as well let that, if this is a project you decide to move forward with, you might as well let them participate. And so anything we would do, the cost that I'm looking at is predicated on having those types of resources available, providing them with the right equipment and policies so that we end up with the desired result. The other thing of my review was, and Bailey said, he said something a few minutes ago, he goes, modernization funding is finished. We don't know it's finished. We do know that there has been no new funding rounds announced. This would have been a perfect modernization funding thing for local municipalities to apply for. Because it's not just a pressure on the county to deal with these local history records. There's also pressure locally in for each of your local municipalities. And I'm sure some council members will speak to that to address it. Middlesex Center addressed it already, ahead of all of this, and has a facility supported archive. But there's similar pressures in every municipality, and there's similar volunteer levels in every municipality where we think this model could work. But I don't think we're going to see modernization funding come forward between now and the budget meeting that would be approved so you're going to have to decide if you're going to commit money to this. I don't have any magic wand funding wise. So as I mentioned, the next steps really are to make sure that I present the financial impact in very strong detail to, like, I have spreadsheets about where our math comes from and present that to county council and to obtain direction on this during the budget process. So that'll be first up to the budget committee, and then it'll come to county council next is where we'd go with this, Warden.
Okay, thank you very much. There's been a few of us that have been around the horseshoe for a couple of these discussions and some new faces. So I'm suspecting that there will be some comments. So any questions or comments follow up to what Bill's just presented? Councillor McGuire.
Thank you, Madam Warden. Through you to the CAO, when we're talking about digital archives, what exactly are we talking about? What are we going to archive? Archive.
Yeah, so well, that's a great question. We don't know, but what our analysis, first of all, we don't know what's out there to be archived, because that's part of the process, is to say, okay, here's what we are going to include in an archive. Here's what we're not going to include. Maybe we're not going to include the 4-H records from 1922. Maybe we are. Maybe that's really valuable. I don't know, but maybe we aren't. So getting those policies in place first is really important about what that's going to look like. We could even work with interested parties to help develop those, because like I said, there are a lot of people interested in this project out there, and they'd be willing to sit down and say, here's what we think is really important. But there are good examples we can send around of Elgin has a good example, I would say, Bailey, of a digitized archive. We can send around examples of what a digital archive looks like. And essentially what it is records you would normally keep in an archive. So files that aren't necessarily municipally relevant as part of a municipal records program, but they're of local historical significance in the, in the mind of the community, really. And so you'd establish those policies, see what's out there, store those records digitally so they could be searched by anybody, anywhere. And we can give you some examples of what that might look like. So it could be maps, it could be like, Michelle, you might have to help me, because I mean, you were at some of these meetings too, but I mean, we had requests to hold public work records from the early 1900s because it helps understand what the weather was like in those days, or, there's stuff like that. There's a pile of records out there that are really not of municipal significance for our operations, but are deemed to have some local history value.
If I may, just a quick follow-up. So that leaves me with the impression that this would really be the county developing a database where other people would be allowed to input their data.
Only difference, I think, would be that the only thing I would add to your definition, how you aptly described it, is that there would be policies to guide what went in, and there'd be some management to make sure that we had got the right things in and got it displayed properly and that it was categorized correctly. Other than that, you're bang on. And like I said, Bailey, we'll try to send around some links to some examples to get your imagination of what it looks like.
Councillor Mayhew, then Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Warden. Question to the CAO. A couple of observations on this bill. There's always benefit in partnerships, and you mentioned Elgin County, and it creates a better marginal efficiency of capital when you partner with someone, but they have a very admirable historical archive, which they market very well to the public. Counties, Middlesex County in my hemisphere are bombarded with information that comes out of Elgin County, and our public read that with much interest. This subject of archives, and there is some repetition here, the councillors were bombarded with communications on this. It was stated publicly, and I think I was one of them, that the ask is far too great and it was not feasible. That being said, I brought to the table my concern about the sustainability of local municipal archives. We have a very active historical society in Southwest Middlesex. But that activism is based on 3 or 4 very aging people. And I'm concerned about that. What will happen to that in the future, and possibly even the very near future? And to give you an example, tomorrow night in Southwest Middlesex, hosted by the Glencoe Agricultural Society, is a presentation on the Japanese internment camp that was located in Glencoe following the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Many people don't realize that that existed. And that is the importance of archiving to illustrate our past. That was a mistake of our past. And it is a subject that has been received with very much interest in our community. And that sustainability worries me, that programs like that will not come forth in the future for not only the residents of Southwest Middlesex to hear, but we will draw from a very large area tomorrow night for people to witness that, the photographs, the pictures of those prisoners, those Japanese on the Pacific coast that were displaced from their families and brought to Glencoe because of the actions of Pearl Harbor. And that is the importance of it in terms of giving you an example that from a marketing background, I know that ideas only last so long. And we have one of the more active historical associations in the county of Middlesex. We also have one of the very best facilities. It is the former Middlesex County Land Archives that we're sitting in right now. A beautiful building that was renovated on the county coin in the early 70s. And they are the residents of that. Our historical society are the residents of that building right now. But the question is, what can the county do to ensure, and I agree with you, Bill, that it should be done at a local level. I agree with that, and I endorse that 100%. What can we do to help that sustainability? That, and generally help usually comes in the terms of dollars. Any response to that?
Yeah, perfect response to that. I think from my perspective anyways, it's to set up a digital archive. Like, you know, everything you just described is all about storing and keeping alive and having the policies and having access and categorize so people can access things quickly. That's exactly, I think the timing, if you're going to ever do it, as you said, I agree with you on the sustainability. It's not sustainable, those local archives, because the interest, it's like a lot of things. The interest in the people that want to volunteer to do it is changing. The priorities are changing. So you have one kick at this. And I don't think recreating local archives and local museums in one big regional center is actually the most efficient and effective way of doing that. In fact, all the places, you know, you'll get thrown in those communications. Everybody else has an archive, which we know isn't necessarily true. But would they do it again in this age of digitization? Like, I mean, everybody else had lots of things back 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 70 years ago when these were done. But digitization has taken over. And so can we achieve the same result, Alan, and help achieve that sustainability through digitization? That's the answer. And that's a support function. See, I don't think we could ever, I don't know how we would ever put ourselves in a position of being able to lead that because of what you just said. You know, that's a very Glencoe type of experience you're describing. There's some, it's hard for me to find those ones that are really county-wide experiences because of the different types of Middlesex there are. That same presentation may not go over as well in North Middlesex or in Lucan. But can we provide what we do in other places? We provide legal as a backbone, but we don't run municipalities. We provide accounting support, but we don't run municipalities. We could provide this digitization, but not do local history. That is the perfect support mechanism for the county, because now we're not getting into local history and saying, hey, I know you can't, your group can't in the municipality put that in because it doesn't affect all of the county. You go right ahead and use it for local history. This is just a support mechanism, so it is sustainable, Because those buildings and filing things the way they are now isn't sustainable. And I agree with you on that. It's not.
Any follow-up, Counselor Mayhew? No, okay. Counselor Clark and then Counselor Smyburn.
Kind of forgot what I was going to say, but I'll get it. I have personal experience, that's leading me to this question. So I have the original deed for our property that's dated 1847 and it's signed by Colonel Talbot, and we have that in our possession. And when I wanted to get some information about it, I actually went to the mezzanine level at UWO. And that was a great resource just for my own information and trying to understand the lay of the land and how it changed over the years. So is there any possibility of partnering or offloading to the university to take on this project?
So just to be clear, that's not the question we were asked to look at in this, but I'm going to answer your question anyways. That's just not what we did in this. In the past, we have looked at that. And the actual inverse was true. When we started talking to the university back in those days, Lindsay was around in those days, Julie was around in those days. When we started talking to the university in those days, they were actually looking to offload stuff to local municipal partners. And they were going in the opposite direction. They weren't looking to take on any more. And so it never really became something that was feasible. We had a lot of things. We identified some things that we thought, hey, maybe those are better. Like even things like this, like maybe those are things that are better protected in a different type of environment than this one. And the opposite was true. They were pushing back. Now that story may have changed. That's got to be, I always lose track of time, but that's got to be over a decade ago. But that certainly is the direction we heard.
Right. And my question comes from quite a history. Like it was quite a while ago. I'm just trying to think of resolving it or streamlining it. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Counselor Smyburn.
Just wondering if the option of the digital archive has been shared with members of the committee. Just to
Oh,
see what
yes,
the
sorry.
feedback they've provided.
Yeah, because we talked about it here at council. I think when you go to, I don't know what's in their mind, but I know that when they spoke to us, I think Alan kind of touched on it. The ask was like pretty high. And so council said, well, let's explore this, because I think almost unanimously people felt this was a better way to go for the future, not looking backwards into the past. And so I know that there'll be some disappointment with electronic archives. Like Alan, I think that's pretty clear from the groups that we talked to. So they know this is the direction council asked me to go. Yes. And I know that their ask was completely different and has been fairly consistently. The time, and getting back to Sue's question, the time we came closest to a partnership for space was whenever I'm going to say it wrong, but the Spreet at Fanshawe Pioneer Village, Spreet building at Fanshawe Pioneer Village was opening. And there was a look at the council of the day of having an actual archive there. And council voted against doing that. 2010. Okay. So that's quite a while ago, 10, 12 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I can just add, I think that it's not a problem, but just an observation for anybody that's done a lot of traveling, or if you're a history buff, is oftentimes certain projects take private money to bring them to something. Like if you looked at Southwest Middlesex and you said you wanted to monetize that, how I'm aware of that situation. I actually had a client that was in the war, and he and his brother were separated. One ended up in Australia, and he ended up working he lived at the POW camp in Glencoe, and he used to pick potatoes on our farm. Now, that was before we owned that farm, but those people are gone now. And they're even in Appin, there was, when my kids were little, it was like a little shack, and they had the uniforms in there and everything, but I don't know whatever became of that, if it's still there. So it takes a private citizen and private money sometimes to turn this into something that people will be interested in. That, like, to your point, Bill, it's not always important across the county to be the focus for everyone. So that's where it may find some difficulty.
Any further comments? Questions?
So next steps,
Next
Warden,
steps.
details at the budget committee, and then we'll come back to you after that for a decision.
Sounds good. So with that, I would ask for a mover and a seconder, and that the local archives update be received for information. So mover and a seconder, Councillor Mayhew and Councillor McGuire. All in favor? And that is carried. Okay, continuing on.
I kind of warned, you want to keep going? Or you want to take a break?
Well, no.
Oh, you want me to talk quickly?
Yeah, I do want you to talk quickly.
Okay, I kind of warned council in November and December that January, February, and March were going to be busy times. This is another one that falls within this is a huge decision, and this is the background for a huge decision. Why I'm talking about the decentralization project now is, who's moving the slides? Oh, Paul is. Okay, go ahead, Paul. Why I'm talking to you about this now is because when the warden tells me it's okay, either today or another day, I'm going to be asking you a big question about the final step in our decentralization project. And my job here today is to make sure you understand what the decentralization project was, is, and why it was important, and to get to that final phase of decentralization. So I'm going to try to help you understand the origin of decentralization project within the time limits. When the warden hits me with this thing, I have to stop. We're going to talk about everything all the way from the sale of the county capital, use of proceeds, and then get to that final phase of the project. I just want everybody to know that if we go to the origin, Paul, this has been a long-standing project. This started in 1997 and 98 when I arrived. It was one of the first things that happened here. This room was completely different. The services we delivered we were a sleepy little county back in 1997. You know, our biggest thing was highways and the nursing home. And then the Who Does What panel came about, and it changed everything. All of a sudden, we were responsible. You know, the levy turned 3 times overnight. The level of services, the type of professionalism we needed here changed instantaneous in 1997. My predecessor had a much different job than I did in 1998. And council asked me to do a large SWOT or vision analysis of what the new requirements would be for capital, because there just simply wasn't enough room in this building to consider all those new services. We went from something like 12 services to 36 overnight. Like, it just was like that. So you can imagine in any business, that's a huge change. And we had to start looking at what we're going to do about it. So I don't want you to think the decentralization project started last year. It started a long time ago with a common goal. And that common goal was really to try and get efficient use of capital, but also to try and get our service delivery right-sized. And by that, we mean, how can we get our people as close to possible to the people that they deliver the service to? And council had a really big decision to make. They had to say, are we going to have a monolithic structure, or are we going to have a decentralized structure? And to their credit, they chose the right one, in my view, because we could have just, actually, the plan was to use some space where the health unit was and just put some more people over there and have a monolithic structure. That would have just kept their services even further away from the people that it served. And instead they chose decentralization, which was that's a business decision. That's not a political decision, which is the right way to do these types of decisions, in my view, around capital. And I was really proud of that decision because it ignored a lot of sentiment, because they knew that was the first step towards what would ultimately be the sale of this property a couple of years ago. So I say that, you know, what was really important was having a long and consistent plan. And in almost every single phase of this project, we exceeded council's expectations. Whenever we look at why we should decentralize, it's pretty clear that there's been some amazing benefits of doing that, getting closer to our citizens, highest and best use of land. Can you imagine if we had built a city hall on the most valuable piece of property, or kept a 100-year-old brick building on the most valuable piece of property in southwestern Ontario? Or it just doesn't make any economic sense. The revenue potential just kept on increasing for the properties that we owned, and so it made sense to look at that. it's a more sustainable model whenever you decentralize for a lot of different reasons, which we can talk about. Accessibility, this building itself is not very accessible for people with any type of access issues. It's also not accessible when you live in North Middlesex or Southwest Middlesex, just from a proximity point of view. So we had to look at that. We had to look at what our maximum footprint was, and it was too big for this building, and we would have had to do something else. Utilities, the human resources cost, Jess can tell you, Chris can tell you, Cindy can tell you, we looked very, very hard at what the advantages were of getting our people closer to the services we deliver instead of having them come here every day in a centralized model and then paying the mileage to go out and deliver those services. The decentralized model has really, really saved us a lot of money. And finally, we were under a lot of pressure from council to work with local municipalities on creating new synergies. And we've created new synergies like crazy across the county with lower tier municipalities because of this decentralized model. Before we started using this model, we were those guys in London, not partners. And now in every phase of the game, we're a partner. You don't have to look very far, from planning to IT, to legal, to finance, to anything, human resources, anything you can name. We're a partner with in any of those areas with 95% of the municipalities. And that's really been a fantastic result. Our internal goals, when I say that, I mean, what did Bill really want and what did our team really want? I wanted to use business modeling. Like I said, if we had just used sentiment, this would have been an easy decision. Slap another floor on 50 King and away we go. We just keep everything the same. But I was really proud that we used business modeling for every single decision. We wanted to improve public service. We wanted to improve access for employees, governance, and the public. Those synergies I talked about, reduce costs, long-term efficiencies. We also, there's so much change at the county level in that time frame of 1998. We had to keep an eye on potential expansion. And I don't mean restructuring at that point. What I meant was, are we going to get more things? Are we going to get more social services? Are we going to get, we actually did get more. We got ambulance more, which is another whole thing after that 1998. So a lot of things happened after 1998 that we had to prepare for and be ready for. And there's new things we want. We want control of dispatch. There's new things we want to be in charge of that make our other services better. And we have to be flexible. We had to address transit concerns. I think Kara and Lindsay did surveys for years where the first thing was always transit, transit, transit. It is very difficult to get to a monolithic structure far away to get services. So we brought the services much closer to the people. We wanted to utilize remote work opportunities, and we did that in spades. The warden said when COVID hit, we were at a huge advantage because we had already started to use remote work. If you don't have to have an office and you don't have to be in a building in downtown London, why are you? In fact, in some of our service areas, we know for sure that it's a more efficient model to be 100% hybrid by far. I mean, 100% remote. In other places, it's required that hybrid works best in terms of efficiency. We've looked at all of it, but we had a huge advantage, as the warden will tell you, because we were started 3 years because of Bailey's department and the work of others. We were 3 years ahead of COVID with working remote. We wanted to sell high and buy low. Some of you know I have a bit of an investment background. It was mostly in real estate at Omer's. When I first drove up to this building in 1998, I said, wow, what a piece of property. This is going to be the most valuable piece of property in Southwestern Ontario someday. And it turns out it actually became that. And we had several opportunities to sell low and to get out of it. And each time we made the right business decision to not do that. And we peaked with the sell high and buy low work that we did. We wanted to reinvest any sale proceeds into achieving goals. We didn't want to take new tax money to fund the decentralization project. And we wanted to create new economic development opportunities. So to complete all of this, we had to examine each business area. I don't want you to think that this happened in a vacuum. I've already told you it didn't happen quickly, but we took a really good look at what the operational needs were of each one of our services. As I said, when you have as many service areas as we have, there's lots of moving parts, and you cannot say this is the best thing for every municipal service. You just can't. You have to look at them individually each time. And I started looking at them in terms of area, service area type, Paul. You're just going to go ahead a little bit. There's site-specific service areas, facility-independent service areas, synergistic service areas, and location-independent service areas. I divided up all our services into those categories. Site-specific is fairly obvious. Land ambulance, you kind of need to be with an ambulance, you need to be with a station. Not really great for remote work. Same thing with Public Works, same thing with Strathmere Lodge. Those places, and in each of those cases, they need their own type of building. It's like I said about an archive. You can't just throw a bunch of records into this room. You need a site-specific building. All of these fit that bill. That's the first category of service. And we looked at those very, very carefully. This is a different type of service. Good examples here would be legal, HR, and IT. They really don't need a facility. They're facility independent. Wayne's team is completely virtual. Jess's team for a couple of years, up until more recently, completely independent from a facility, could be anywhere virtually, and then meet with folks, which the way she works is she can be remote, but she'll meet with folks in the facilities that we have that are facility dependent. And same thing with IT. We do have a component of IT that needs a space for constructing computers, but for the large part, that can be completely virtual. So I call this group of services facility independent. The next group of services are synergistic. This is the group where we work with the local municipalities. In each one of these cases, this didn't exist before. None of this existed before where we were working with municipalities in any of these areas. But now we have library, planning, engineering, economic development, and social services. For example, Kara's office is in, the economic development office is in the wellness center. The planning offices are all in your local municipalities. The libraries are now comprehensive libraries, all in locally owned facilities that we're delivering services out of. And social services is out in municipal offices and in libraries as well, all synergistic. All not new capital, but all with capital reinvestments to make them work. And so those are really great services that have really done well. And then finally, there's this location independent. And this is really getting down to our final question, which is, what are we going to do with this group? Because I'll tell you, all those other groups, I got looked after. They're already set. But what do we do with finance, governance, and administration? Basically, the top 2 floors of this building. If you look around, that's basically you guys today, finance, and Marcy and I, and that's it. That's basically what we're left with in terms of a footprint. If you come here on a non-council day, that's the people you see in here. And I'd encourage you to do that. Brian and I had this talk yesterday. It's a little depressing coming in here. There used to be a whole, it used to be a couple hundred people kicking around here from time to time. Now, Jess and I were talking, some days it's 15, some days it's 5. It's just not the same because we have deployed so many people out. And that's not always easy for council to see, because you come today and you see all these people around here and you go, oh, wow, all these people work here. No, Neil doesn't work here. Brent doesn't work here. Jess doesn't work here. Paul works here sometimes. So you surely should come on a non-council day and see what I'm talking about. This team has done an amazing job of getting the people that need to be closer to the clients out to those clients. So that leads us to creating synergies and taking advantage of opportunities. And if you look at the opportunities, synergies started to develop because a lot of local municipalities wanted closer connection for some of our services with their services. Planning is a great example. It actually started, I think, with IT, as that is the first example we had, but planning became a great example. Planning, building inspection, all of that stuff, those synergies were created. The other opportunity was peaking land values. We tried to sell property in 2008. I think for those of you that are real estate investors, you know what happened in 2008, pretty significant crash. And we didn't sell low. We just hung on and waited. I'll brag, and the warden brags often about the IT strength for hybrid work. If we didn't have that leading into this, if we didn't have that backbone, I would have said, forget about it, do centralized. because you just can't get away with what we've achieved without that backbone of IT, and it was world class. And then COVID pushed us even further faster. Like I say, we were already doing this, but it made us examine some areas we hadn't really considered doing this early. And that's why there's so few people in this building regularly. And then the other opportunity was each new synergy that was created, it really did reduce the critical mass footprint. Like this is a big building for 15 people or less every day. That's a lot of square footage, a lot of expensive real estate. And with each group, like some of you may not remember or even know that there was a time when all of library headquarters was here. They were all down in room 9 and 10. There was a time when all of engineering, of course, was here. There was a time when almost everything was here. And yeah, Lindsay barely remembers whenever that happened. Were you here even then, Lindsay? No, you might not have been here when it was all here. She wasn't even here. But an ambulance management was all here at one point in time. So we've gradually pushed all of these things out to where they need to be. And that's created a reduced critical mass for our footprint. We've been also watching for capital funding and embracing remote work, and creating and recognizing synergies is on there twice. So that's good. Okay. Now, what? I got to tell them the story. Decentralization in action. This is incredible. Like this happened. You know how some things can sneak up on you? And then Brian and I were talking about this last week. You kind of forget sometimes that just how much decentralization has happened right under your nose. Like the Central Operations Center in Middlesex Center, a massive decentralization getting our engineering crew, but it also created new hybrid work opportunities for hoteling spaces in an amazing location in Middlesex Center that's easily accessible for all our group that works towards that north. That's great for Mark Brown, who you met. That's great for a whole bunch of people that use that type of service. Mark used to have to come in here to use an office space. Can you imagine coming into town, the time alone, then the gas to go back out and do his thing? Now there's multiple options for people like Mark to deliver the service by using some of those new operation centers. Library head office development, I mentioned this earlier, now in Strathroy. That was a new construction that we did with the museum in Strathroy. Social service delivery office in Strathroy, that's a new renovation that was done out there just recently. I talked about Woodlands, Mark Brown's team and what they do. The IT headquarters, for the most part, we've got out of the county building, I think almost entirely, except Bailey hangs his hat in here every once in a while, but they're almost entirely out of this building and out into the county. Early on development is another example with Strathroy Caradoc development, and also some work in other communities. The server bunker, now this is really important. I mean, this is really the heart and soul of all of our facilities. We first had it in this building. We then had it in the building at the museum next door with the city. And now we've relocated it in what I would call a world-class bunker server within outside of both these facilities, nice and secure, with a new world-class bunker we're really proud of. I mentioned that because there's no people involved there, but that server room's big. That's a big footprint that it takes up. Lots of racks, lots of cooling equipment. And so that's no longer here either in terms of our footprint. Economic development, I mentioned. Social services delivery center, comprehensive libraries were a game changer. In Allen's community down there in Southwest, it made a huge difference in terms of delivering services to have a comprehensive library. And Thames Center made a huge difference because we just didn't have the ability to deliver services out there. And now we do, thanks to all those comprehensive libraries. So, there's 5 of those. That they're major service centers for the community. Before all of that was delivered out of here. And it's all been pushed out into the community now where it's needed. Planning services, I've mentioned, at EMS headquarters. That's a lot of decentralization. All of those things used to be right here in this building. And that's happened all within the last 8 to 9 years. Just look at this. Do we have the facilities map there, Paul? Yeah, perfect. If you look at this facilities map, you can see we really only have 2 things here on our map that are in London. We have our EMS headquarters, of course, and we have the county building, but this map looked nothing like this, some time ago. 15 years ago, this map didn't look like this at all. It looked like that one purple dot in the middle of London. And that's a lot And you can see too, we're pretty evenly spaced in Thames Center and North Middlesex. Of course, a lot of our facilities are already in Strathroy and Middlesex Center, where we have our major population centers. But I just wanted you to be aware of just how many facilities now are being supported out there in the county. And so we got, am I okay still?
Just so everybody knows, Neil and Bill and I have to present to the City of London at 4 o'clock. So that's why I'm rushing him along. Now Neil's talked to the city. We've got a little bit of time, but that's why. It's not because I'm trying to
So you think I can slow
rush
down?
thing. No, you can't slow down.
I'm joking.
but-
Okay, phase 3, timing and sale of the county land and capital. Now, this is really important because most of you weren't around the table, and I get asked questions about this from you all the time. I just got asked a question about it again this morning. And when you look at the county building footprint and what council had in terms of a decision, it was a no-brainer. We really just weren't using this building the way it should be used in terms of the number of people in here. We owned a piece of property that was perfect for significant residential development in Strathroy Caradoc. We called them the Strathmere lands. That was a piece of property I almost had sold in 2008 before the market crashed. We had it actually listed. We had interested purchasers, but the market crashed and we hung on to it. And then I'm telling you that we had significant advanced preparations. A whole pile of things happened. As those that were around the table will tell you, it just wasn't a sale that just came about by accident. There was a lot of legal work, legislative work, zoning, decentralization, and marketing. And that led to an oversized outcome for the county council in terms of the land sale. When you look at where the money came from, $30 million came from 3 payments for $399 Rideout and 50 King. Still to this day, the largest land sale, most valued land sale per acre in the city of London, and probably will be for a very long time. That's a massive outcome considering what the initial appraisals were that were presented to council. Strathmere lands, $6 million, 1 payment in 2022 that is now being developed into residential properties. So 2 fantastic outcomes. And we had a double benefit because we hit peak market conditions for both properties, and it supports our long-term strategy. Alan was very nice and gave me a shirt, and it says, "History will judge us on how we spend the money." And he's right, because if we had stopped the slide before and said, "Hey, we won. We had a massive land sale and it supported our overall plan for decentralization," and stopped there, that would be silly. And Alan's right. It really does depend on how you spend the money. And council looked at this, and we looked at lost revenue. You got to remember, we were getting lease revenue before from 50 King, and it was gone. It was an annual financial impact, and we have to invest to replace that. We have a new facility investment we have to make. And that's what we're going to be talking about next, is how do we get a much smaller footprint, leverage existing infrastructure, and do we lease or own a new facility to deal with the remaining pieces of the puzzle that we haven't dealt with yet? We had investing in tax relief. We already have very low tax rates compared to our full service county neighbors. We're in a very strong financial position that can be argued as one of the strongest in the province. And we also have important stimulants coming out of tax relief. We also wanted to provide stimulants coming out of the pandemic for tax relief. And we wanted to reduce our tax rate so that we were competitive, allowing us to continue with our growth. In course of history, growth hasn't been a problem for us, but being competitive, our competitive advantage really is our tax rate. We get asked a lot about that in economic development because it is significantly lower than our neighbors. We also wanted to support the Infrastructure Investment Fund. This is something that I worked on, and this is coming out of annexation. One of the first projects I had here in 1998 was, how was this money going to be spent? And it replaced lost assessment and is self-replenishing and consistently reviewed. And this fund is used by all the lower tier municipalities to help replace that lost assessment that was lost during annexation. Terribly successful program. Ask your staff, they love it. And a great fund. So we had to find the right balance with how we were going to spend this money that we had. We had $36 million and we had Alan's t-shirt in our mind. So this is how the money got divided up. $11 million in tax relief, $11 million for growing our communities in the form of adding to the fund, $8 million in replacing lost revenue, and $6 million for a new facility investment. Now, that could either be in covering lease costs or in building something new. So these slides, you can look at your leisure. This is how we allocated the 13 million, 8 million, and 15 million over time. And so in 2025, the last payments for the $30 million in the January of that year will be the completion of those payments. And that will mean we'll have put all the money in those buckets. Pretty easy to support, I think, for county council, that balance of how we distributed the money kind of along a whole bunch of different categories, 4 different categories. And so, Warden, that leads me to the final phase of the project, which is on the last slide, Paul. How do we deal with a new facility investment? And I needed to tell you this whole story so we can get to that question with the right education whenever the warden tells me it's time to talk about that. But we're ready to go. We're ready to have the conversation, and administratively, we're anxious to have the conversation.
So there is more to this, but any questions or comments on what has been presented? It has been a lot. We were going to go in camera, but we're not. We're going to defer that until the February meeting for the next piece of the puzzle. But certainly what Bill has presented could generate conversation if there's any comment or questions from council at this time. On the history
Yeah,
lesson.
the fun part's next.
Yeah. Well, then maybe that's when we'll have more of a discussion. So at this time, I would ask for a mover and a seconder that the decentralization project update be received for information. Councillor McMillan and Councillor McGuire. All in favor? And that's carried. Maybe what we'll do is we will take a 5-minute break.
Okay.
And figure out what we're going to do next. So if I could just get a mover and a seconder to take a 5-minute recess, Councillor DeVite and Councillor Clark, all in favor?